to talk about .NET and Apache Spark with a very special guest. And I am very excited to announce that Jeremy Likness is with us today. Jeremy, welcome. How are you?
I'm doing great, thanks. Just got back from a week-long vacation, so feeling recharged and energized.
Okay, great. I hope you enjoyed your vacation. So before we start, I want to ask you to introduce yourself. I am sure people know you, but it is a classic question.
Sure, I currently work as what's called a program manager for .NET Data. Excuse me, and that role means that anywhere .NET developers touch data or interact with data is part of what my concern is at Microsoft. A big part of that is working with the Entity Framework core team, which is a data access API. It's an object mapper, and that's one of the products I work closely with. The other is .NET for Apache Spark. But I also look at other technologies like OData, like GraphQL, and really all up. And I've been a professional developer for 2 decades now, quarter century. I've developed my whole life. I'm a very passionate developer. I live out near Microsoft in Washington State. And outside of what I do for Microsoft, I'm a big fan of virtual reality. Do quite a bit with that just as a hobby, as a consumer, not as a developer. And I'm big into hiking. I'm very close to a mountain range that I get to hike quite a bit. So, very happy about that.
Yes, thank you. So before we start our topic, I want to ask you what is Apache Spark and what can we do with it?
Sure. So, Apache Spark is what you can think of as a distributed platform for big data analytics. That's sort of the tagline. But what that means is traditional methods of dealing with extremely large data sets when we're looking at terabytes and petabytes of data, putting that into a relational, for example, SQL database and trying to analyze the data can be difficult because of just the complexity of relationships and referential integrity and other things that come with that type of database. What Apache Spark does is what just happened. Am I still on?
Yes,
Yeah, I just
there's
had
a
a,
screen flashing.
yeah, I don't know, something just got loopy with my system. But here, let me try to find the StreamYard. There we go. There's us. Okay, so not sure. You can still hear me. Everything's
Yeah.
good. I will restore the sharing in a minute. But basically, what the platform does is it provides a distributed way to analyze data. So what you can do is you can take these extremely large data sets and you can define units of work that process the data in a certain way. And that can scale out so that you have multiple parallel processors. So it enables you to deal with big data at scale and do things like analyze the data, aggregate the data, find out insights about the data. And the Apache Spark is really the underlying platform that makes all of that possible, if that makes sense.
Yeah, great. So, what is the minimum .NET or Apache Spark version required to use .NET for Apache Spark?
So .NET for Apache Spark supports Apache Spark versions 2.3, 2.4, and the newer one is 3.0. So all of those will work fine. As far as the .NET version itself, we build .NET for Apache Spark to target .NET Standard 2.0. And so any platform that supports that implementation of .NET Standard is going to work. So that includes the latest .NET framework as well as .NET Core versions, 3.1, which is the stable, and then of course 5.0. We support that out of the box. There were no compatibility issues with that.
Okay, so which .NET languages other than C Sharp are supported? For example, can I use F Sharp or VB.NET?
VB.net is not directly supported. Technically, it's .net. So if you had a library for that, I haven't tried that out. But F Sharp is definitely a language with first class support for .net for Apache Spark. So C Sharp and F Sharp are the main .net languages supported, and those are the ones that we have examples of on the website.
Okay, as far as I know, before .NET for Apache Spark, I can use Python or Scala. So I wonder about the performance compared to other programming languages.
Yeah, so the good news is that the performance is very comparable. The way the Spark architecture works is there's a Spark core engine that exposes a set of APIs to do the work, and then the languages basically interact with that API and provide services over that API. So as far as performance is concerned, most performance tests show that .NET is consistent. In some cases, excuse me, in some cases it may even perform better. So performance is definitely not the issue. The idea is more around what the developers are comfortable and confident with. So if you have a development team that's already using Python or Scala, then we're not trying to say that there's a reason to go to .NET for Apache Spark. But if you are a .NET developer and you're used to C Sharp or F Sharp, this provides a means to work with the platform. The other advantage that you get with .NET for Apache Spark is you can pull in existing libraries. So if you have existing packages that you've built with .NET, you can pull those in and reference them from a .NET for Spark project. But the performance itself, the API actually hands off to that core engine, so there aren't really performance concerns that I'm aware of with using .NET for Apache Spark.
Okay, thank you. Um, can I use it on other operating systems rather than Windows? For example, can I use on Linux or macOS? And the main question is it open source?
Yes. So .NET for Apache Spark is open source. We've actually had some great community contributions. In fact, I may have a chance to share some of those in a little bit, but it's on GitHub. It's just github/.net/spark. And because it targets .NET Standard, it is cross-platform. You can use it from Linux, from Mac OS, from Windows machines.
Okay, this is the most important question today. And if I want to try .NET for Apache Spark on my computer, what are the requirements?
Okay, well, there's a couple of approaches. Let me pull up see if I still have my web tabs after the great crash of just a few moments ago. But the first thing that I'll show is, I'm going to zoom in here to the link. If you use this simple link, aka.ms go sparknet, that will take you to our getting started page, which has the set of prerequisites for this. And let me just zoom this a little bit. But basically, this will walk you through the steps. Of course, you need .NET because it is .NET for Apache Spark. You'll need Java, and this is something that Spark runs on. So the way that .NET for Apache Spark works is we provide a layer between .NET and Java to interoperate basically between that Spark core. There's, of course, Apache Spark itself to install, and then there's a .NET for Apache Spark, some environment variable settings, and then you're ready to go. So there are a few steps for that local development loop, but there's also, and this is where I talked about community contributions, there's also a more straightforward way to do this. And let me show you an example of that. I actually do not have these prerequisites installed on my machine. I don't have Java or Spark, but because of a community contribution, this is Visual Studio Code, and I've got the Docker extension. and you'll see there's this Docker thirdman.NET Spark. This is a Docker container that has all of those prerequisites installed with it. This that you see here on my screen is a fully self-contained Spark application. It's just a .NET, I believe it's a .NET 5. It's a .NET 5 console application. The only thing that I've referenced is our Microsoft.Spark library. So that is in general availability 1.0. So I've referenced that. And then what this program does is it basically creates a Spark session and then uses something called a data frame, which is the way you interact with data from .NET or for Apache Spark in general. And it's counting words. It's basically taking the words out of a text file, turning them into columns, doing a group by an account so that you can see the words. Now, if I were to run this right now, I'm going to go ahead and hit F5. And what you're going to see is it's trying to run, but we should get an error pretty quickly because I don't have the prerequisites on my system. However, thanks to the community contribution that I just showed you, what I can do is, for me, it's just 2 steps. The first thing I'm going to do is run this Docker container. So now that Docker container is running. The other thing is this will run Spark in the context of the Docker container. So my code will be passed to the Spark engine. So the Spark engine is running inside of Docker. So it's not going to see my laptop's file system. It's going to see Docker's file system. So what I want to do is just take that text file that it's going to count, and I'm going to move it into the Docker image. So Docker PS lists the Docker containers I have on my system, and we can see that there's a container running, and we can see it has this unique ID. So what I can do is I can use the copy command to copy my text file into the container. I'm just typing enough of the unique ID to identify it, which, because I only have one container running, I can just use those first 4 characters. And then where I'm going to copy it is in this .NET debug folder. Okay, so that just copied. So now that I have this running and that copied, I'm going to hit F5 again. And this is going to rerun it, only this time because the container's running, it will actually connect over the exposed port on that container. And you can see I've hit my breakpoint without having any issue. So let me just do F10 to step over the breakpoint. And what we should see is that we've set up this data frame to do the word count. Now I'm going to use this show command to actually perform all the processing and do the word count. And I'm going to show my console window here. And there you can see it's come through. So the text file I pulled from the .NET conference website. So you can see .NET is the most counted word. But that's an example of prerequisite. So there's a way to set up the full Spark on your system and have that available. But there's also this method of using the community contribution of a container so that you don't have to install the prerequisites. You can just run it from the container. And then in most situations, you'd have some sort of server in the cloud or on premises that you would submit your jobs to.
Great. Do I need to install an extension on VS Code? Or is there an extension?
To work with Spark, you do not need to install an extension, but to work with Docker the way I am, there is a Docker extension for that. So let's look at what I have installed. So .NET Interactive, yeah. So this Docker extension right here is what I installed just to make it easier to work with it. It's not necessary. I could have gone to the command line and just run the Docker image from the command line and done it that way. But I like having everything in one place so that integration with Visual Studio Code is helpful.
Okay, great. So as far as I know, correct me if I'm wrong, I can use Apache Spark for machine learning projects. So I wonder if it is integrated with ML.NET.
So the integration, there's a few levels that we can talk about with integration. So Spark itself has some machine learning libraries that those APIs are exposed and you can tap into. So you can certainly use that. ML.NET, because it is a .NET package and .NET for Spark supports .NET, can be pulled into a Spark job. So you can interact directly with ML.NET. So in that sense, it is integratable because I can have a Spark project that does work, hands that work off to ML.NET. However, in Spark, there's something called a data frame, which is a pretty standard way of dealing with a set of data. There's a lot of things you can do with data frames, but the best way for people familiar with SQL and traditional database development, data frames are almost like materialized views. They're a very specific insight into a set of data, and you can correlate between data frames, so you can join across them and you can use them for aggregates and everything else. ML.NET uses a different concept, and I forgot off the top of my head, but there's a representation of the data that you're dealing with in ML.NET that's slightly different. So for now, the requirement is that you have to pass the data between Spark to ML.NET. So you might translate it, you might stream it, you might write it to a file and read it in. What we're looking at in the future is to be able to actually share the same data view between the two. And in fact, I think that's what it's called in ML.NET. So the answer is you can work with them together in projects, but there is tighter integration that could happen in the future, if that makes sense.
Okay, thank you. So you showed me how we can use on our computer, but I want to ask you another important question. What if I want to use it on Azure? Is there any integrated resources by default, or can I integrate with the existing resources? For example, Azure Databricks or other stuff.
Right. So the answer is there's a few options when you're looking at the cloud. At the end of the day, we built this as an add-on to the Spark core. It's not a customization or a fork. And so in that sense, any platform that supports Spark should support .NET for Apache Spark. You may have some steps to install, for example, the package for the Microsoft Spark, but whether it's Databricks, HD Insight, there's pathways to do that. But one of the things I did want to share is offering that we have called Synapse. I'm going to go to the homepage. So Synapse is really a dashboard designed to deal with big data and abstract away some of the configuration and nuances and details. So it provides a very streamlined approach to ingest data. So if I use this data column, I have databases that I can work with. I can link this to Cosmos DB. I can link it to storage accounts, etc. Excuse me, I have a compute tab that lets me set up Spark jobs that I can submit. So when I build a project, it's really a job. When I ran it, I was running a job. So we can submit that to the cloud. But what I really love about the Synapse is it has this integration here with notebooks, and we'll see how long it takes for this session to start. I'm going to let that spin up and talk about a few other sections because the first time you start this up, it can take a little while to spin up the cores, but once they're up and running, then you can interact, and I'll actually show you what that looks like. So we've got this interactive notebook experience that I'm going to talk about in a second. There's orchestration. So the common use cases, if you will, that we see for Spark are ETL, so transforming data in a pipeline, as well as analytics, as well as data warehousing. A lot of times those will happen on a regular basis. There's what's called batching, where you get a group of files, you submit a job, and you take care of it. And then there's also streaming, where you have continuous ingestion of data. And both of those are supported and can be orchestrated as part of a pipeline that moves data from one side to the other. So if we look at this notebook lets me in real time interact with Spark. So here I've just used C# code to create a Spark session. Now on this command, what I'm doing is I'm reading some file that I uploaded into my storage, and I'm just showing that. And this is metadata about a repository. So I pulled down a documentation repository and processed some metadata, like the words that are in the document, the title of the document, some other information. So what this is doing is pulling it out of the file system, and now it's showing me that it has a view into those documents. And I'm not going to step too far down this notebook because this could be an entire presentation of itself, but these are examples of some Spark things you can do. Like here, I'm just using that data frame that I created in the previous step, and I'm saying simply just give me a count. And I'll run this, and it's going to give me a count of the documents. Now, what I showed you on the application that I ran locally was being able to count words. Well, what this is doing is this is taking the file format here that has a column that's just all of the words grouped together in a column, and it's translating it so that we have each word in a separate row. So if I do this, I'm basically saying take that column words and split it into an array called word list, and then take that array and turn it into a row per word. So when I run that, what this will do is it'll go out, process that data frame, and it'll actually create a new data frame that has basically the file name and every word in the file. And then I can go on and start doing statistical analysis. I can look at clustering. I can figure out which words are important, etc. But the important thing to note is that this is something that I can use out of the box without any pre-configuration and interact with .NET for Apache Spark directly without having to submit a job, wait for the job to run, and without having to set things up locally. I can do it all entirely from this notebook experience.
Okay, thank you for the demo. And for example, I am working on a real-world project, a big Apache Spark project. And what challenges may I face when using .NET for Apache Spark?
Challenges are interesting. We recently ran a survey, and we asked developers that question, right? We wanted to know, how can we make .NET for Apache Spark better and a better experience? And what was interesting was we asked questions about big data projects, and then we asked questions specifically about .NET for Apache Spark. And we found that really the biggest challenges people are facing at the front of the project is simply setting up the prerequisites. So getting what we call inner development loop, that interactive debug, can be challenging. Now, in the past, it was a lot more challenging because we've made a lot of updates to the debug experience. But one of those challenges is the prerequisites, getting your system set up correctly. And there's some special steps that you have to take to be able to debug Spark locally. It can be done. It's just more setup and manual setup than we'd like to see. So that's one challenge. Actually, building and running the project is very specific to the project, of the resources and the things that you're trying to do with the project. We didn't receive as much feedback from that as we did of actual features of tooling and interacting with the production Spark environment. And what I mean by that is, for example, most of our .NET for Apache Spark developers reported that they use Visual Studio as opposed to Visual Studio Code, which I showed you, for their primary way of building projects. And right now, there's no direct way from within Visual Studio to submit the job, right, to run for Spark. And there's not as great of a story as we'd like for continuous integration. So if you have a CI/CD pipeline set up and you want to have jobs automatically be submitted, somehow tested, somehow stored in your target platform. So those are all things that we're working on based on the feedback for the survey. But having said that, we have internal teams such as our Dynamics teams, Office teams, and some other teams that are using .NET for Apache Spark in their own projects at scale and are reporting very good success with that scenario. In fact, I hadn't had this prepared, but let me see if I can pull up a deck real quick. This is actually a presentation we did for .NET Conference, but I'll share it to my screen in a second. I'm trying to see, I think I have a quote from a project. Yeah, let's pull this one over. Let me see if this projects to the correct screen. Yeah, so this one was building ML deep models to infuse intelligence, right? So Azure Data Lake Storage is where the data is. C# for .NET, Spark.NET is what they use for those workloads. Promising, stable, highly vibrant community. And the scale is about 50 terabytes of data. So that's an example of one of our own teams, the Office team, using it internally at scale with success.
Okay, thank you. While we are waiting any questions from the audience, can you please give me some spoilers for future updates, or are there anything new on the roadmap?
Sure. So the roadmap is very much focused on two areas, I would say at a high level. The first is maintaining parity with Spark releases. So Spark keeps releasing new versions. The way that this project is set up, layered on top of Spark, it can keep pace with that. Usually if a new version comes out, you can probably plug into that version, but there's new APIs that we need to extend and plug into the platform. So that's one of the things on the roadmap is as new Spark releases and functionality come out, we're adding support for that. But the other big area is just developer experience. And the things we're looking at is the things that people responded and said were important. And that is looking at what we can add to Visual Studio to provide a tighter integration. One of the things is submission. That's a very high priority. We thought that a debug from Visual Studio experience where you just open the project and hit F5 would be the higher priority, but in the survey, that was the lowest priority. The highest priority was give me that submission. Let me work on my job, submit it directly there. So that's one of the things that we're looking at. And our roadmap hasn't been finalized. We're in the process of 6.0, so nothing is a commitment yet. But the things that we're looking at and being informed by the survey include that experience, the continuous integration experience. And then from notebooks, if you have a local notebook set up that you're interacting with Spark, that notebook provides an IntelliSense experience. In the Synapse notebook right now, the IntelliSense is more limited than we'd like it to be. And so that's another thing that we're looking at improving is that experience as well. But those are the two main things: keeping pace with the developments for Spark, and then improving the developer experience so that there's minimal overhead as possible from a developer saying, I want to start a .NET for Apache Spark project. We want to get that developer up and running as quickly as possible, and then give them the tools to debug and submit and troubleshoot their jobs and make that as easy as possible.
Okay, thank you. So thank you very much for joining me today. It was a very educative session, and I am 100% sure everyone watching us like it as well. And hope to see you again on further episodes next year, maybe.
Sounds great.
Okay, thank you very much again.
Thank you.
Have a great year and Merry Christmas.
Oh, Merry Christmas to you too. Have a great year.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you. Cheers.